Hey guys, wonder if you miss me. This is Terry Lassane, part of the duo with Karen Perry of Professors Providing Professional Development, and I'm here to actually record a video and share it with you today. Many of you know that I've been dealing with physical kinds of issues and so haven't been up on campus for about 6 weeks, and I've really missed recording things with Karen. But in the meantime, here's something from me, and hopefully we'll be getting back together soon to produce another PPPD video for you. Today, I want to talk about what might seem to be a bit odd, and it's book talking, what not to do. The next video will, of course, be book talking, what to do. But I wanted to start with kind of some of my pet peeves about book talking, and I'll start with this one right here. Do not end each book talk with, and if you want to find out what happens next, you'll have to read the book. Many years ago, I was sitting in the front seat of a session, listening to people book talk, some book award winners. And one person in particular, every time that person would talk about a book, they would finish with, and if you want to know how the book ends, you'll have to read the story. And I thought, well, of course, but this is more irritating me than it's making me want to read the book that you're talking about. It seems to me kind of obvious that if you want to find out what happens in the book that you have to read it. That's kind of the purpose behind the book talking to begin with. So you need to find a way to bring a book talk to an end. That's something that we'll be talking about in the next broadcast. But don't end always, not just with this line, but with the same line time after time after time. The idea is to provide some variety. Another pet peeve: do not talk about books you've not read. I know that there are lots of folks out there that are going to disagree with this, and that's fine. This is a personal kind of issue here. I have a hard time talking about books that I have not read cover to cover. And part of it is because when I'm book talking in many cases, I'm doing so in front of an audience of people who are thinking, oh, I need to have that book, or who are writing down books, or who are going to buy those books and use them with kids. I want to make sure that I've read the book. I want to make sure that I tell them enough about the book. I don't want to just hold up a book and say, well, this book has gotten 6-star reviews, so it must be pretty good, because we all know the fallacy of that one. I know some people who will read first chapter, last chapter, middle chapters, and I guess that's one way to kind of put more in there. But I really, really, really don't talk about books that I've not read. I want to be able to say, when I'm presenting a book to you, that this is a really great book, that here's the audience for this book. I want to be able to do that, and I'm not sure I can do that unless I read the book. Do not talk about a book you did not enjoy or like. And I'm really sorry because there's a typo right here. And I will fix that eventually. But don't talk about a book you didn't enjoy or like. There are a couple of exceptions here. I have occasionally held up a book and said, you know, I understand why this book won awards. I understand why people love this book. This is not a book that I loved. Because, quite frankly, sometimes there'll be somebody else out there that'll say, oh, that sounds like just the kind of book I want. But for the most part, I find it hard to generate enthusiasm for a book that I didn't like. Have I read books that I didn't like? Of course I have. Everybody does. I always feel kind of compelled to read lots of the award winners, and I don't always walk away saying, gee, I really like that book, but I walk away saying, I understand why people admired this book. I understand why it won awards. I understand what it does really well. I would prefer to talk about books that I really, really, really like to read. Don't talk about books in only one form, format, or genre. It's okay every once in a while to say, okay, I'll picture books today, although that's a form or format and not a genre. Or today I'm only going to talk about biographies because that's the kind of thing that we need to be talking about for class this week. However, for the most part, I try to make sure that I don't have too much of any one thing. I know that early in my book talking career, so to speak, I did almost totally realistic fiction. I never did anything historic. I never had nonfiction. And I realize now that that was probably not a very good thing to do. So I always try to make sure that I'm not focusing on any one particular form, format, or genre. Do not script your book talks. There are tons of people who do write out book talks, and Jenny Bodart has wonderful collections of book talks. Nancy Keene has podcasts of book talks. I tend not to write out my book talk. What I might do is jot down some general notes, but I find that the best book talks come as I start talking the book. And as I talk about it over and over and over and over again, it becomes scripted, but that's only because I've done this book talk countless times. So I consider not scripting your book talk. I also think that I don't consider things like lexiles, levels, and any other artificial measures when I'm book talking. I once had a school ask if I could only do X kinds of books in the book talk, and I declined. Um, I don't want to be limited by a list. I don't want to be limited by lexiles and levels and artificial measures because that's not what determines the audience for a book, and that's not what happens during a book talk. I've seen so many kids tackle tough books that were probably not in their lexile or level because the book talk made them sound like something they wanted to read. And so I really try to stay away from something like that. So I figured I'd end up this book talk, do's, don'ts in this case, with my favorite book talk of all. This is the one that, gosh, all the way back in the 1980s when I was visiting schools and doing book talks, this is the book I talked about all the time. I would pick up the book. I never showed it to the kids. Pick up the book, and I would read aloud from the first chapter. And the first chapter basically says this: because the things that happened to me were strange, I know that some people will find them hard to believe. It's like when your mind slides from sleeping to waking, and something takes place that's so bizarre, you tell yourself, this can't be happening. It can't be real. Or I'll jolt awake from a nightmare and there are still unfamiliar shapes moving through my dark room. I know they can't exist and I must be awake. There'll be more questions, and I'll have to repeat the answers over and over again, even to myself. And so I've bought a thick yellow-lined tablet, and I'm going to write down everything that took place, beginning with the day I died. Now that's a great read aloud. You have to admit that. So I would start with that, and then I would tell students a little bit about the book. And basically it's a story of a book about a girl who has a near-death experience from drowning. And she moves with her family to Houston. They find a bargain of a house on Memorial Drive. Well, my kids from Houston knew immediately that something must be up because Memorial Drive is not exactly a poor neighborhood. But they move into the house and they understand why there was a bargain. Because when the girl walks in the front hall, she sees blood splattered everywhere, all over the tile, all over the floors. And as she's standing there wondering why her parents are not freaking out, a voice whispers out of the shadow, "Ayúdame," help me, in Spanish. What the girl discovers is that a double murder has taken place in the house. The murder has not been solved. And as she begins to ask questions, begins to do her own investigation, she becomes the target of the murderer who's still out there. Then I would say the book is Whispers from the Dead by Joan Lowry Nixon. And I would follow that up with one more thing, that if they came to check out that book and it wasn't there, just to go to Joan Lowry Nixon and just scan down, because The Weekend was murder, The Name of the Game was murder. All kinds of wonderful, wonderful mysteries set in Houston or in East Texas by Joan Lowry Nixon. So there'd always be something that they could check out. So that's my book talk of the day. Coming up next, how-to book talk. And hopefully I'll be joined, or Karen and I will actually be able to do it together. I hope that you find this a valuable book talk. And remember, PPPD.